Thank you so much for being here. My name is Shannon McManus, and I am the Director of Professional Learning here at the Museum of Science in Boston. So we also have a lot of Boston and Massachusetts folks here tonight. So thank you again for taking the time out of your busy evenings to join us and learn a little bit more about the Youth Engineering Solutions curriculum, and really to just dig into how to get started. So the agenda that I have for today is that we will kind of do a little bit of an overview of the YES curriculum. We'll think about what the YES lesson structure looks like. We'll have an overview of what does it mean to choose units, to plan your implementation and give you some tips around that. I'll share where you can find and what all the resources are that we have for our curriculum. We'll think about material management and some facilitation tips. And then we'll have some time for questions. But really, the chat is open. So yes, this is going to be recorded, so I will be sharing that webinar recording at the end of this session. So there's also going to be, I'll actually give you the link to this now. We have a Google folder where I have many of the resources that I'm going to be talking through here. I have a copy of the slides that I'm going through here, and then I will upload the recording to the webinar in this Google folder. But we'll also send that out via email. So this will be recorded, and you can take a look at some of the resources that I've saved into that Google folder there. What is YES? So our mission at Youth Engineering Solutions is to create the next generation of problem solvers through hands-on STEM learning. And we are at the Museum of Science, where their pre-K 8 engineering and computer science and STEM curriculum. So we're formally known as EIE. Oops, let me go back. Formerly known as EIE. So we're backed by over 3 decades of research, leadership, and STEM education. And really our goal is to shape the future of problem solvers. And so we have that, many different grade levels, resources, and resources that can fit into many different settings. So whether you teach preschool for our We Engineer folks, elementary school, middle school, or any kind of out of school or enrichment settings, summer school settings, we have resources for you. And to ensure that all schools can access our content, those lesson plans, and student resources that we develop, they're all free for download. So to just, again, give you a little bit of a bigger picture before I dive into some of the nitty-gritty and some of the details about how to get started. In general, all of our units are really focused on real-world hands-on engineering challenges. So students are introduced to and they address authentic problems. So like plastic pollution and declining bee populations or medicine coolers. And so that's kind of the focus and what grounds the actual units, or is this kind of problem solving, this hands-on approach to problem solving. And our curriculum, was developed through National Science Foundation research and classroom pilot testing. So nothing goes out that hasn't been pilot tested. So we know that it works, and we incorporate teacher feedback. And honestly, if we hear any feedback as we go, we make changes along the way as well. But we do have a set of design principles that anchor our curriculum. So this framework that you see here is one of our frameworks that we use to anchor our curriculum, and really these are our design principles. So students engage in ways of doing engineering. So this idea of authentic engineering practices, which include many things, but designing, building, testing, also collaborating, also persevering through failure. And we really hope, and we know from our research, that engaging in this kind of work really helps to build problem-solving habits, collaboration, and persistence, and really helps to see students. Our big goal is to help students to see themselves as engineers and to really deepen their STEM identity. So again, that's kind of high level what we do. But to get a little bit more specific, if you wanted to get started in this kind of work and into doing this with some of your students and your classes or in any settings that you have, is our lesson structure. So the engineering design process is really at the core of most engineering work. And this is the structured iterative problem solving process, this engineering design process. And this actually really just informs the arc of our lesson structure. And so all of our units are anchored in the engineering design process and consist of 5 to 9 45-minute lessons. So really, we're very flexible. But primarily, this unit structure includes a lesson on what is engineering, focusing on what the problem is, that real world problem. They explore materials, and then they move to the engineering design challenge. And so all of our units are really very flexible. So I said that 5 to 9 45-minute lessons. So all of our units are standalone. They're focused on one particular engineering challenge. And typically, if you're going to pick a unit, you would align that unit with maybe a science concept that you're teaching or a topic that you think your students would find interesting. So let me give you an example. So let's say you're teaching magnets. So this is just a page on our website, you would probably look at our engineering magnetic dog doors unit because that focuses on magnets. And so this is an overview of our 9 lesson structure. So this is just kind of an outline. And I'm not going to talk through every single lesson, but this is a good example of what many of our lessons look like. So, and I'll share some of them, but these lessons, like in all of our units, are scaffolded for students to understand the context of the problem and the content about the science and other materials that they might be using in their engineering design as they move through the engineering design process. So really, we try and make sure that they have that background information so that they can make connections and informed design decisions. So the very first lesson of every one of our units, lesson 1, is always an introduction to the engineering design process. And if you attended last month's webinar, you probably would have seen Kendall talk a lot about all of our intro to engineering lessons. And so this one is the one that we typically use for our in-school elementary. So in elementary school, students are asked to design a model bench for people waiting at a bus stop. And they go through that design process, and then they reflect on how they solved that problem using the engineering design process. And so really that's where they're first introduced to the fact that engineers use a process to solve problems. And thank you, Alyssa, for your question. The difference between the engineering design process for elementary versus 6th grade EDP, I will show you once I'm kind of done. I don't have actually a picture of the 6th grade or our middle school EDP, but as we move along, we're probably going to do another webinar on the trajectory of engineering learning, because actually in our preschool curriculum, our engineering design process is just 3 steps. Our elementary school engineering design process, you can see, is 5 steps, 6 if you include improve, which we always do. But then as you move into middle school, we start to get into even more steps. And really, real engineers, they can use engineering design processes that are, I've seen some, they're like 24 steps long. So we try and increase the complexity of the design process. And once you move into middle school, there's things like identify the problem and communicate your solutions. And so I can show you at the end just an example of what that looks like. But they do get more complex as you get into the higher grades. So that's the first lesson for all of our units. In varying, we have a variety of different engineering design challenges, and I'll link you to the recording of last month's webinar so you can see all the different engineering design challenges that we use to introduce the engineering design process. But then, so remember, now we're in magnetic dog doors. So students are now in lesson 2 really introduced to the problem through a comic book. So here they learn about Mara and Ricardo. They live in Puerto Rico, and these characters in this comic book are introduced to the fact that there is a problem in their community. There's a lot of stray dogs, and they've talked to a woman who works at the local animal shelter, and she has a problem, and she really needs help really making sure that stray dogs are allowed into the animal shelter, but that no other animals get in, because she's having a problem with rats getting into her animal shelter and kind of wreaking havoc. So Mara and Ricardo think about the doors that they have and they experience in their lives, like the refrigerator door. How do they stay closed? How do they open? So how can we help our community by designing a dog door? So that's kind of the introduction to the context. And then as you get into lessons 3, 4, 5, so I'm just kind of lumping a lot of these together just to give you a sense of, each one of these lessons would be 45 minutes. And so in subsequent lessons, they learn about magnets. So there's a whole lesson on exploring magnets and thinking about the different materials that are attracted to magnets. They play a little magnetic relay game where they try and pick up different materials and see, okay, what stuck to my magnet, what didn't, as I go back and forth and play a little relay game. In another lesson, they measure the force of attraction between a magnet and different materials by counting the number of little pieces of cardboard boxes that each material can hold between a magnet and that magnetic material. And then another lesson, they measure the force of repulsion. So you can see here, this is just a sketch because they do it in the comic as well, of the testing setup where they actually, think about the different types of magnets and different numbers. Like if stacking magnets, is that going to increase my force of repulsion? And so they really, these 3 lessons are scaffolding lessons that allow students to think about the materials, think about what magnets are, how do they attract, how do they repel, what are the different strengths, and they can use that information as they then move on to the next set of lessons. So this would be an example of lesson of them starting to engage in the remaining steps of the engineering design process. So in lesson 6, for example, they imagine different ideas for a dog door. So you can see this is the model of the dog door. It's just a small little cardboard box. And so they start to sketch out different ideas that they have individually. And then they come together and they plan as a group. So you can see here, there's different prompts in our slide deck to help students come to a consensus on a team plan, because sometimes that can be difficult to come to a consensus there. And then they actually record their plan in their engineering design notebook. And they think about, what do they need to put any magnets on the dog's collar? Do they need to put it, or magnets or magnetic materials? Do they need to put any magnets or magnetic materials on the door so that as the dog goes through that door, it can pop the door open? And then in lesson 8, they learn, in lesson 7, they actually do create and test. So that's when they start building. So there's a whole 45-minute lesson that's just creating and testing. And then in lesson 8 is when they learn that engineers often need to flip the failure. They need to try new things. Oftentimes the first time does not work. And so students will then flip their failures, if they had any, and make improvements to the design. And so that's typically our lesson 8. And then in lesson 9, they really think and reflect on the engineering process that they went through. They think about how they were engineers. They actually present their designs to their peers and reflect on the engineering design process and how they identify as engineers. And so again, that in a nutshell, again, I encourage you to come to professional learning and other opportunities that we have to really dig deeper into the lessons. I just wanted to give you a sense of the overall arc of these lessons and how we scaffold those lessons so that students can make informed design decisions. And thank you, Peter, for your comment. You work with students who are very resistant to the idea of having to design before making. Um, I hear you on that. Oftentimes, even in professional learning, many adults are resistant. They do want to just dive right in. And I do think we have very scaffolded engineering notebooks. And the engineering design process is something that we use not only because engineers use the engineering design process, but because it is a structured problem-solving process, and we anchor many of our lessons in those steps. So there really is a whole time to imagine. So oftentimes engineers don't just dive into the materials and start building a bridge. We need to think carefully about what we know about bridges and forces and what acts, what are our criteria, what are our constraints. So I think, my very quick piece of advice for you is to just, relate this to what real engineers do, and they don't just dive in. Engineers don't often have maker spaces. They have computer simulations where they have to imagine ideas and make really specific plans. So one idea is to relate it to the real world. They have a budget and they can't just spend everything on their first idea. They need to really think through and use some of what they learn and what they know about magnets and about various different things to make informed design decisions. But that's a great question, and maybe we can come back to that later on and see if other folks have any ideas as well. But this is basically, so that's again our very quick lesson overview and what these like a 9-lesson flow might look like. And now as we go into thinking about, what does it mean to implement a unit? Where might you start? What kind of unit would you pick? There are a lot of different ways that we've seen educators use our curriculum, and it really varies from setting to setting. Not one teacher, not one classroom is the same out there. So educators have different classroom setups. You could have a very large classroom with lots of shelves and cabinets and all kinds of things. You could be a teacher who teaches off of a cart. We know folks also have very different schedules with their students. So some people see their students every day. Some teachers only see their students once a week. And so we have designed different types of curricular products that will be more useful or suitable for different types of settings. But honestly, all of our units are very flexible. And that's kind of at the core of how we design the curriculum. So that really, if you're in school, if you're out of school, science teacher, STEM specialist, general ed, all of these types of educators and more, there's something for you and there's some way to implement successfully. So I'll just kind of go over, how we've designed our curriculum. And there's two kind of categories, I would say. We have our Yes Elementary and our Yes Middle School units. Those are designed, we call them our in-school units. They're designed really specifically around science concepts for grades K to 8. So you'll notice the one that I just described, the magnetic dog doors. You would likely, that's a Yes Elementary unit. You might facilitate that because you have already taught magnets, or you're trying to teach your students about various magnetic concepts. So those units really are designed specifically to teach science and to support science teaching. There's also computer science modules that accompany the middle school units and the upper elementary units. The other type of curriculum and the way we've kind of designed this other product or program is called Yes Enrichment. And now these units are a little bit more versatile. There's only 5 core lessons. So you'll notice the magnetic dog doors. I said that there's 9 core lessons. They can be flexible depending upon how much scaffolding your students need. But the yes enrichment are really not as closely tied to science concepts. They're very closely tied to engineering standards, but they don't need as much scaffolding in terms of science content, and therefore there aren't as many core lessons. There are 4 additional optional lessons, so you certainly can fill 9 days or 9 lessons of engineering, but those would be 4 optional lessons. We also have more explicit career connections in our enrichment units. One of those optional lessons in most of our enrichment modules do include a whole career exploration. But you can be guaranteed that all of these options, the yes elementary, yes middle school, and yes enrichment, they're all research backed, they're all hands-on, they're designed for all learners. They're budget friendly, they're all free for download with low cost material kits to accompany them. And there are many, many opportunities for cross-curricular connections in all of these units. So there's really no reason why you couldn't implement any one of these units in any of your lessons or any of your settings. I'm just going to pause to answer this question that we have here. Will there be CS lessons for K-5? There are EIE ones, but wondering if there will be more added. So thank you for knowing your stuff and your EIE history. So yes, there are engineering is elementary, computer science, but what's very exciting is that the middle school does have computer science modules that accompany every one of the middle school units. And for Yes Elementary, this coming October, I'm so excited, we are launching and releasing our computer science modules for 4th and 5th grade. So if you teach the magnetic dog doors, oh no, I'm sorry. If you teach safety vests, your circuits content in 4th grade, or in an upper elementary class, we have a new computer science modules that's coming out that's all about signal bracelets. So maybe you don't wear something that, you can wear a vest, but you need to signal using a little bracelet on your wrist. And also our plastic filters unit, we're going to have an accompanying computer science module that's focused on machine learning, and it uses the Teachable machine from Google to have students think about photo classification. How can you teach a computer to identify a photo that is a picture of trash versus a photo that's a picture of animals, so that we know whether or not we should install a plastic filter in that particular river. So anyway, that is a very quick overview of our computer science units that are coming out just in October, which I'm really, really excited about. And we do have plans to continue to develop more of a yes version of our computer science modules for the elementary school as well. So thank you for that question. A couple of other implementation tips is really, as I mentioned, generally people utilize a mix of units. There's really no reason why you can't use any type of product type in any scenario. So my guidance is typically, if you're brand new, to teach like 1 or 2 units a year just to kind of get your feet wet, get your students' feet wet. But we have seen settings that implement up to 4 units in a particular school year, so 1 per quarter. And just also keep in mind, if you're doing more than 1 unit, you can do them in any order. It's not like magnetic dog doors has to come before safety vests, which has to come before plastic filters. Any order, each unit is a very discrete engineering challenge, and once you're done, you can do any other one. And then another kind of tip that I have in terms of implementation is if you teach multiple grade levels, so we know there are a lot of STEM specialists out there, you can group grades by grade band and implement units by grade band. So let me give you an example of what I'm kind of talking about. So some districts, so this is just, I know this is a lot, you don't need to read any of this, but this is an example of an implementation plan that we developed for a district that suggests what units we might recommend if every single grade level were going to do 4 different engineering units. So we could also help you to develop a plan that says, okay, now let's say you want to do 2 units per grade level. Here's what we think your implementation plan might be. And we could kind of talk to you about what are your settings. Is this a teacher on a cart? Is this, we can really work with you to think about your implementation plan. But the other way we like to think about it is for STEM specialists, we know that this would be a lot of units. If you are a K6 or if you're a K5 STEM specialist, you could potentially be looking at, I'm going to do math here quickly, but like what, 24 units a year? That is a lot. That is a lot to do, a lot to manage material wise. And so we've thought about implementing units more in a grade band setting so that you could group grades together. So we typically like to keep kindergarten by themselves because we have designed the curriculum specifically for kindergarten, and we know that some of their fine motor skills aren't what they are at other grades. But for example, this is a plan we created for a STEM specialist. We would say in quarter 1, you would group grades 1 and 2 together, and they would do, both grades 1 and 2 would do pumpkin pollinators. And then in the second quarter, both grades 1 and 2 would do nightlights. But then the next year, we're not going to repeat those units. We're going to do different units in the next year. And so we just kind of think about grouping some grades to make it a little bit easier for the prep for STEM specialists. So you don't have to learn 24 units in a year. You can, potentially just learn 3 to 6 or 4 to 6. So rather than taking on all that prep and all of that planning. So that is, just an example of one of the implementation plans that we can support you with. And you'll notice, please do contact us for any kind of support that you might need implementation planning. We're always happy to talk through that with you and see what works for you and for your setting. We also do this for summer schools and after school programs. So really thinking carefully about where are you teaching this and what might work best for you and for your educators. And also in that Google folder that I shared, we have a document that outlines our suggested units based on alignment with national and state standards. So this is a version of our NGSS document. We also have this for many other states as well, and what units we might suggest for each grade level. And so that's kind of my big takeaways in terms of how to support you and your educators and your colleagues in implementing and kind of deciding on a unit and deciding on where to begin. We also have lots of resources for you. So we want to make this experience easy for you. Oh yes, sorry, here we go. Here is the Google Drive folder. So we want to make this easy for you. So all of our resources are free for download. And actually in that Google Drive folder, I just shared a sample of the magnetic dog doors unit that I gave you, but that's just one example of all the units that we have. And that's not even all the resources. I just kind of shared the PowerPoint for magnetic dog doors and the teacher guide and the comic, but there's a lot of other resources that are all free for download at yes.mos.org. And so our resources, we have resources that support teachers and teaching, like educator guides you'll see in our Google Drives, slides. We have low-cost materials kits that you can purchase. We have how-to videos, family resources, vocabulary cards to help with some of our language scaffolds. And we also have resources that support learning as well. So students can use engineering notebooks. In those teacher slides, there's sentence stems and prompts to really help students through this idea of collaboration. Sometimes that doesn't come naturally to kids, so we need to give them some sentence stems to structure some of those conversations. There's comic books, these context-setting narratives that really introduce these real-world problems to kids in age-appropriate ways. All of these experiences, all of the lessons are hands-on. And so that helps learning a lot. We have material glossaries. So if students aren't familiar with all of the materials that they are asked to explore, we have material glossaries that help them with. And we also have student-facing materials that are both in English and in Spanish. And so anything that is student-facing, like the engineering notebook, vocabulary cards. This is an example of a little animal fact card from our plastic filters unit. All of those resources are also in Spanish for students, English and Spanish. And so, we do have resources to help you figure out how to download all of this. But, again, let's say you wanted to do magnetic dog doors. You would go to that web page, you would select that unit, and then you would just download the unit from each of those unit pages. And you would eventually get to a Google Drive where you can either download the entire folder of all the resources, or you can download individual resources. Just to kind of give you a little tour through this this Google folder. In our print materials for English, just some of the resources you'll find in there is the engineering notebook, the context setting narrative, your comic book for some of our older grades. When you're in the younger grades, we have more storybook slides, material glossaries, those vocab cards, an engineering design poster, and a lot of other resources for each individual activity. We also, for middle school, which is really exciting, our engineering notebooks, once you dig into that folder, we also have engineering notebooks that are digital. So for most of our units, all of our elementary and enrichment units, our engineering notebooks, they really do guide students, through that engineering design process, just like you asked, like, how do we structure this so that they do imagine and they do plan before they dive into making the engineering design. The engineering notebook really helps them through that process to record their observations, their sketches, their plans. And in middle school, we have a digital version of that. And so we have digital slides, Google Slides, that they can kind of drag and drop and type into, and that's their engineering notebook. In Spanish, remember I mentioned, we have all student-facing materials in both English and Spanish, so that's the whole folder of that. You have the teacher guide, which includes lesson plans, information about material prep, and any background information you might need. And then there are teaching slides as well for every single one of our units that has guiding questions, vocabulary, or those sentence stems that I mentioned. So lots of resources for you. And another resource that we've heard from teachers when we first started over 20 years ago, or more than that, is that teachers really wanted the kits. They love the hands-on, and they don't want to have to go and buy pipe cleaners from Michael's and Scotch tape from CVS. It's just they just wanted it all in one place. So we have these really low cost material kits to get you started. And teachers really do think it's so much easier to just get the material kits and have everything in one place. And it really does have most of everything you need. Sometimes you need to source things from your class, things that are difficult to ship, like water. We don't ship water, but also like chart paper. That wouldn't be something that's part of our material kit, but most of the materials that you need for the engineering challenge are all included in the kits. In middle school, we do have section kits as well. So we don't have other refills for our elementary, but we know that, most of these materials are very reusable, and the ones that aren't reusable are really easy to source and easy to refill. So we have those. We also have, we also have a print package. I meant to mention, oh yeah, print package that also is sold separately, and that would give you a printed version of the teacher guide, but it also gives you multiple sets of like heavy duty things that you could reuse. So like the vocabulary cards, that's something that you can use from year to year. So it doesn't include like an engineering notebook, because that you would need to print off for any student that you had, but things that you could keep from class from year to year, like vocabulary cards, material glossaries. Oftentimes we have a price sheet for the material. So things for activities that you can use from year to year, that would come in our print package as well. which educators have also asked for. Um, and so now that we've kind of gone through all the resources and we just ended on material kits, let's talk a little bit about material management, because really, as with any high quality hands-on experience, that we know students benefit greatly from actively engaging in that hands-on process. But at the same time, preparing and managing materials for these kinds of activities can be really challenging for teachers. So I'll share some practical tips to help make that preparation and management a little bit easier. So um, for most of our units, I would say almost all of our units, our design challenges have what we would call like base models. So kind of before you even get started, you just want to get a sense for, okay, what's the challenge, you know? And so like, for example, the magnetic dog doors. Um, the base model that students are going to kind of keep looking at and keep using and keep kind of iterating off of is the door itself and just this little frame here. So you would need to, you know, basically this comes as a little flat box that you would need to fold together, and then you kind of cut the backside out there. And so you would need to create that base model. So for magnetic dog doors, you need the door. For plastic filters, you can see here, there is this model bay. So you would get this plastic bin in your material kit, but you would need to fill it with water. And we also have some lines drawn at the bottom of it to kind of denote where their filter is allowed to be placed. For our pumpkin pollinators, you need to make the model flower. But again, you get the paper cup and you get all this orange tissue paper. You just need to make the flower. And for another example would be for medicine coolers for our middle school unit. You know, you would get all these cardboard boxes. You would need to make those boxes. But again, those are things that they're going to use kind of from lesson to lesson as they design. So the base model is kind of one component of material management that you would need to kind of have from lesson to lesson in most situations. But then you also have the materials that they use to like make the thing. And so there are materials associated with exploration activities. So for example, the pumpkin pollinators. In early lessons, students explore the properties of these materials, an eraser, a feather, and a felt. So they kind of test and they dip an eraser in baking soda, and that's their model pollen. And then they drop it off on one of those black dots, and they think, okay, is this good at picking up and dropping off? So they do a whole lesson on just these materials and how well they pick up or drop off pollen. These are going to be the same materials that they can then use to design a hand pollinator for their final design challenge. But those will be other materials that you'll just need to, again, part of the kit, you just need to kind of gather and organize so that they can have their exploration in lesson 3, and then finally put that out on a material table for when they actually go and engineer in their final few lessons. Another example would be in medicine coolers. All of these materials, aluminum foil, bubble wrap, cardboard, felt, and foam. In lesson 4 of medicine coolers, students are going to explore each one of those materials to see how well or if it's a good thermal insulator or a bad thermal insulator. So they're going to test that and measure how well it insulates. So then they are going to use those same insulating materials to design in your later lessons as well. So again, you know, so we have your base models, and then you have kind of the exploratory materials that you're going to need to organize. And so to help you with that organization and with that prep, we have teacher prep videos that basically tell you, okay, this is how you set up a circuit, and this is how you would test. So this would be for our safety vests unit. And you can see like most of the lessons have teacher preparation videos that help guide you to, okay, how do I set this up? How do I do this one? But then there's also student-facing videos on the website and embedded into our slides that will support students with the activity procedures. So this is a video from our plastic filters unit that has, you know, it really shows kids, okay, how do you pour your plastic pollution into your model bay to model this flow of plastic into a bay. And so, you know, that video is there to help you kind of with those testing procedures. And then there are also teacher guide tips. So on our unit prep, our unit map at the beginning or in the front matter of our units, there's the timing for the prep for each one of those lessons. And then also at the beginning of every lesson, there are instructions for how to prepare materials for each lesson in particular. So these are just two examples of our medicine cooler prep that's embedded into the teacher guide. And then a couple of tips that I have done a lot of teaching of these units in both professional learning sessions and with kids. And some big tips would be preparing in advance is always critical, as with any hands-on work that you do with students. Any time that you're spending counting out paper clips is time that students can get distracted. So it's almost more of a classroom management tip to have your materials prepared in advance. Also, I find that packaging items for efficient distribution is really part of that, like, material management. So for example, this is one of our, I think this is lesson 4 of our night lights unit, where students are given a tiny little flashlight and this binder clip to sort of set up the testing station. This little post-it is really just supposed to be a little distance. It sort of measures the distance that they're supposed to put the different pieces of material in front of the light. And so they're given a variety of materials like wax paper and construction paper and plastic, and they see how well does light pass through those materials. So is it a transparent material? Is it a translucent material? Is it an opaque material? All of those materials can easily just get cut out and put in a little baggie with the post-it note, with the little mini flashlight, with the binder clip, so that each group you have it all ready and you distribute that. And that can be prepped before class so that you're not, passing out a piece of construction paper to each group and a light to each group. So I like to package everything for each lesson so that the groups are ready to go. And then also, this is a kind of an image of what your, actually what the night lights kit would look like. And this beautiful plastic tub is what all the materials come in when it gets shipped to you. And so it's a great resource to just store all the materials as well. So this plastic tub is also great for easy storing. So those are a few tips that I have, but again, just recognizing that this hands-on learning is so beneficial to students, and materials is part of the process, and it requires just some management and organization in order to have it move smoothly. And I have my last question from Kimberly. Thanks so much, Kim, for joining us from Richmond. So thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity for learners. And this, one of my big thoughts around facilitation tips is really to just come to PD. We would love to have you here in Boston. We also have opportunities like this, like these free webinars. We have monthly free webinars. And we have, I'm going to share a couple of other resources. We have asynchronous resources, but really we strive to meet educators where you are, whether that means you're in Richmond and you can't come to Boston, or if you're in New York or Indiana. We want to meet you where you are in an approachable way and to encourage, long-term professional growth. And so we have a variety of resources from workshops to webinars, asynchronous resources to help you build knowledge and strategies and confidence in teaching engineering. So one example of that is we have a learning library that I will share the link to in a moment, but that learning library on our website has us really looking at what does it look like for students to be engaging in engineering. And so one of my favorite things about engineering is that there's no right answer. So it almost takes a little bit of pressure off you as a teacher to always be the bearer of knowledge. And so there's no specific results required. And so in this quick video, I'm just going to play, you can see how students are thinking of multiple design options and ideas. And so these are kids reflecting on their experience with the enrichment unit, our rescue shuttles unit.
We talk to people, we draw them kind of in the paper. We have to draw them and do the plan, like in the engineering process technique. But we do the plan, the imagine, plan, create, whatever. The goal and test.
What if What? Combine tape and paper to do literally pencil back. I know, don't touch it.
I like talking to things and drawing it, and I like to do them because then I have an idea what I do.
So you can see there, they do have an idea of what they want to do, and those scaffolds really help them with some of those brainstorming multiple solutions. And so these are all, I have one more video because videos are great, and they really show you why this is worth it. But another example of a video that you'll find on our website. So you can look through our whole learning library, and you can encourage colleagues to look through our learning library to get facilitation tips, to see what this really looks like. What does it mean to collaborate? What does it mean to work in teams when you engineer? Let's just take a look. This is a quick 30-second video. What does it mean? What does it look like to work in teams?
We're not gonna do this now. This is the brim. Normally we are making a stuff.
Yeah, make a big brim.
Guys, look at we already did it.
We're ready to make a big brim.
But that's not even the same. No, it's supposed to be like this.
I don't know how to make that.
Can I help you?
So these are kids in kindergarten, asking for help. And really in our learning library, we ask questions, we have reflection prompts with some answers below, really thinking about, okay, what prompts could you use to help that group explore the different possible brim shapes? So this is a copy of, where you would see our learning library. So you can see, you can click on all the different components of our YES framework and watch videos associated with each component of our YES framework. And we also have copies of our past webinars. So if you are interested in the webinar that Kendall facilitated last month on kickstarting your school year. So if an overview of all of our What is Engineering lessons, our lesson ones to really get started engineering, you can watch that on our website. Sorry, I will give you the link in a moment. And next time, so since we don't have that much more time, we do have other facilitation tips, but we thought it would be great to hear from teachers. So next month on October 28th, we have a really exciting opportunity. We have a couple of teachers coming to join us to share their own classroom stories, their own tips. So they're going to share, how they chose their units, how they prep materials, some of those facilitation moves that, when you're dealing with hands-on engineering, and also scenarios that don't have the right answer, how do you support students through some of those unknowns? And also we're going to have them share the impact that they saw on students as well. So here is the QR code. You can scan that. You can also register on our website. So everything I'm sharing with you can all be found out off of yes.mos.org. There's a professional learning tab. So I'll give you a quick little tour of the website after I give you some time to scan this QR code. And when you go to webinars and workshops, that's where you can go to see all of our upcoming PL. So that's just another webinar, but we do have upcoming in-person workshops. So we have a STEM Leader Institute, which is kind of like a train the trainer. That's a 2-day workshop happening on October 7th and 8th. We have an enrichment workshop, just a 2-hour quick workshop on September 27th, on Saturday, September 27th. So if you are in the area, we really do encourage you to come to us. If you are far away, we encourage you to come to us. We would be happy to host you, especially for that October 7th and 8th STEM Leader Institute. That's a good 2-day workshop that would make your travel worthwhile. And And now you can go to our website at yesmos.org. If you have any questions, please do contact yes@mos.org. And then one other thing, so this is just kind of our contact information, but remember all of these slides are in the Google Drive that I showed you as well. The one other thing I just wanted to share and encourage you all is to sign up for our newsletter if you aren't already signed up. That way you will be able to hear about all these upcoming releases. So I mentioned the computer science units. We're super excited to share our Yes Elementary version of computer science that is really high quality and really I think a really great scaffold to have students start to think about how, machine learning works, which is really the first step to AI, and really thinking about what goes into a computer, what comes out of algorithms, and the safety vests unit with the microbits is also a really engaging computer science lesson. We also have a STEM events product coming out soon, which is like for family STEM nights or STEM events that you might be hosting. It's just they're really great and amazing activities that you can host on your own. They come with kits and it has everything you need for a family STEM night and an activity that helps families and big groups engage in engineering in a very flexible kind of table type setting. And some career resources coming out as well soon. So lots of stuff. We always have new things. We're really thinking carefully about what teachers need and trying to make resources that work for you. So please do sign up for any updates. And that being said, I am all done with my presentation. You certainly can go to our website. I'll be here to answer any questions you have.